Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Pearlie Brewer, and I will be your host. Sawmills and wood harvesting have long been a critical part of rural New Brunswick. Today, we are pleased to have a guest with us who is able to speak to the health and safety component of both woodlands operations and sawmills. Today's podcast guest is Mike Kleine, General Manager of Operations for Interfor. Welcome, Mike.
Right on, Pearlie. I'm excited to be here, talk about environmental health and safety in the sawmill sector. This is actually my first time in the podcast world, so I'm a little excited for that.
So we want to mainly focus on sawmills, but before we do, wood harvesting, obviously to get the product to your sawmills, long been a major concern when it comes to health and safety. Now, I know you're not personally responsible in your organization for that aspect, but I'm just wondering what you're sort of hearing these days from your colleagues relative to woodlands operations. What's sort of going on in those operations relative to health and safety, and what are they experiencing when it comes to incidents, accidents, and so on?
Sure. So in the woodlands over the last number of years, we've actually seen a pretty good shift over the last 20 years, we've actually seen the woodlands teams go from hand falling to very high mechanized machinery, with, modern ergonomic machines, SOPs developed for machine maintenance, real-time quality production data, onboard navigation systems. So technology over the last, say, 30 years even, has helped, bring the frequency and the severity of injuries in the woodlands, teams, down. But, over this year, across the company, we've actually seen, a fair amount of log trucks off the road. In our jurisdiction here in New Brunswick, you do get a fair amount of ice and weather, inclement weather, freezing rain, and in times that, you have to deal with that, there's been a number of incidents along our logging roads in New Brunswick and across Canada, with trucks off the road. So that's been a focus for us, working with our contractors, on, how we can better maintain our roads and plow and use chains when we can. And, that's a big focus, for Interfor in the woodlands divisions across Canada.
So sawmills directly, do you have any idea how many sawmills we have right now in New Brunswick?
Yeah. So, we have roughly 30, sawmills ranging all the way from, the small hobbyists, less than 20 million board feet a year, all the way up to the, over 100 million board feet a year. So we have roughly 30. And then we also have 7 what's called remanufacturing facilities in New Brunswick. And what those do is they take lumber that maybe either lower grade or a different cut of lumber that doesn't go into the home manufacturing. And they take that and they make bed frames, they make pallet material. So total in wood products, we have about 37 manufacturing facilities in New Brunswick, and Pearlie to scale that. So I said, I don't like throwing out numbers to people that don't quite understand sawmills. 100 million board feet. Just to give a perspective for the listeners, I have 2 operations here in New Brunswick. We produce about 300 million board feet between our 2 facilities. Now, 300 million, and that's annually. 300 million board feet. It takes roughly 12,000 board feet to build a 2,000 square foot home. So we're producing enough lumber to build in excess of 25,000 homes out of our 2 sawmills, for Interfor New Brunswick, every year. So just to kind of scale the size of, the mills here in New Brunswick.
So where would your 2 mills be located?
I'm currently sitting in Beldoon, up in northern New Brunswick. The Beldoon mill total has about 230 employees, and that's both unionized hourly operators, maintenance folks, electricians, with about 30 staff, so supervisors, superintendents, quality control. And then I also have a mill in Bathurst. It was previously Chaleur Forest Products. And before that was a Fornebu mill, and it was built, I think, back in '74 to help support the pulp plant that was down in Bathurst that's been closed for a while and decommissioned. So now it's a sawmill, and in Bathurst we have about 120 employees. Right in 95 to 100 is hourly unionized, and the rest is salaried staff. On the woodland side, Pearly, Interfor itself has roughly 34 in the office in Miramichi. And they manage our woodlands out of that office. And there's, Interfor staff is, operations superintendent. We have an EH&S coordinator that's dedicated to woodlands, supervisors for the scalers themselves, wood purchasers, quality control. But as far as like the harvesting, the road building, the tree planting, the silviculture, all the stuff, building bridges, all that stuff, we hire contractors for all that. The only pieces of equipment that we own are a couple of trucks and some snowmobiles. Everything else is kind of done by the contractors, whether that be trucking the lumber to the logs to the mills. It's close to 400 contracted employees that we have throughout New Brunswick. So total, it's about 775 employees between all of our woodlands contractors, woodlands staff, Bathurst and Beldoon, and that's not to count. There's some contracting that's not counted into that. So we have chip trucks that we haul chips away from our mills to AB Cell, to Twin River over in Plaster Rock. So there's more contractors that are wrapped up in, but 390, 400 woodlands employees are contractors that are doing the work for us.
So how would the number of sawmills now compare to, say, 10 or 20 years ago?
So doing a deep dive. So I should say that I'm not legacy New Brunswick. I'm not from New Brunswick. I've only been here for about 3 years. So I had to do a little bit of research, Pearly. 10 years ago, there were only 29 mills, and only 22 of those were sawmills. So they've actually increased, but the bigger sized mills like the ones that we operate are essentially flat. The increase has been more the hobbyists, the guys that are, cutting maybe some specialty 5/4 for decking or, stuff in backyards or in smaller shops. So that's where the increase has been. In bigger mills, it's essentially flat over the last 10 years or so.
So what is your background, Mike?
I'm working in the background that I just turned 48 years old, and I'm celebrating 30 years in the sawmilling industry. I'm from the Pacific Northwest, in the United States, a small town called Castle Rock. It's, north of Portland, just less than an hour drive from Portland, Oregon. So close, when you say from Washington State, everybody goes, "Oh, you must be from Seattle." No, I'm not from Seattle. Very small town, Castle Rock. On a clear day, you can look up and see Mount St. Helens. I don't know if you remember Mount St. Helens from back in 1980, that catastrophic eruption over there. That's in my backyard at hometown. Not backyard, but you can see it on a clear day if you're in certain spots from where I grew up. Got into sawmilling right away. In fact, I should say too, fourth generation. So the company that I worked for prior to coming out in New Brunswick, I was actually a fourth generation employee of that company. Great grandfathers, both my grandfathers and my father, all worked in wood products at one point or another, mainly out in the woods. They were tree fallers, driving heavy machinery, building logging roads and choker setting. I don't know if you watch any of those logging shows from out west that you see sometimes on Discovery Channel and whatnot. Yeah, hauling the tower logging where they're pulling those big logs up. That's kind of where my family started in the wood products. And then, I never really got into the woods side of things. I went into the sawmills, 18 years old, right out of high school, into a really old cedar sawmill along the Columbia River there in Washington. And I swear the head rig in that mill was old enough it probably cut purlins for the Mayflower. It was an old mill. And over the years, you have a lot of paradigm shifts in safety, and looking back at that sawmill, being an 18-year-old kid, I'm glad I made it out of there with all my fingers and toes. It was a pretty rough environment. People walking on log decks and, chain transfers, doing saw changes without any kind of lockout and no real PPE. You just kind of put some cotton in your ears and you don't really get any kind of support from it was a rough mill. And then, getting on with the bigger companies, you start to see, the dedication that some of these companies kind of put into the safety programs. And over the last, 20, 25 years, seeing where it's become, it's great to see. Another paradigm shift for me. So I have four children, and two of which are grown adults, and one of them went to a technical school and became an instrumentation and automation technology guy. And his first job was in industry and a sawmill competitor of ours out west. And it was one of those times where you do have a paradigm shift, because now your kid is working in industry. And, every day I had to talk to him. I would say, hey, buddy, make sure and tie off your ladder and wear your PPE. And you know how young bulletproof kids can be sometimes. Oh, yeah, Dad. Oh, yeah, Dad. Oh, yeah, Dad. But I think they understand it now.
So how did you end up in New Brunswick?
So I was actually recruited on LinkedIn. A recruiter reached out to me. I was working at a sawmill in Raymond, Washington, and I got a message on LinkedIn. And at first, it was just one of those things, like you get them all the time, right? Like there's always people on LinkedIn recruiting, and I didn't take it seriously at first. And it was in the midst of COVID. I came here in August of 2021. But I was at a place in life where, I could take some risk with my career. And the company that owned these mills, prior to Interfor was a private equity firm out of Toronto called Kilmer Group. And it was very attractive. And over the course of about 6 months of because I had to come out here sight unseen, I didn't get to travel to see the mills. Teams calls and sending me videos. And over the course of about 6 months, I kind of worked up the nerve to do it. And to be honest with you, it's, making the move, had a lot to do with the really, really good people here in New Brunswick and the people that I worked with and worked for. The mills are very well capitalized. They're very competitive in New Brunswick. And there's just a lot that went into that decision. But I'm glad I made it. It's been a wild ride.
So you mentioned sawmills have changed over the years. What have you seen as far as change goes in sawmills when it comes to health and safety?
Absolutely. It's when I don't. The technology these days, we, are investing in a lot of new mechanized equipment that takes the person out of the process as much as we can. And obviously, we work in an environment, it's a manufacturing environment. So you're going to have millwrights, wrenching on equipment. You're going to have, people that have to intervene. But over the last 20 years, with good PLC programs and automation and technology, we have definitely seen a reduction in, I would say, finger, hand, and arm and strain and sprain injuries. We still see those on occasion. But we really work hard to kind of build a barrier between the employee and the lumber process, whether that be guards, gates, and also technology. We're doing some really, really fun things at our Beldoon facility with one of our contractors, doing some AI integration into our sawmills, which is, I'm kind of an old school guy, so I kind of have to have things explained to me how it all works. But, it's the up and coming technology for us, in the mills.
So we hear a lot about AI. Can you give us an example of how you would be using it?
Sure. I can.
in,
I'll
in a
stay high.
general sense? Yeah.
Stay high level. So we've always had optimization equipment inside the mills, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we don't have manual graders anymore. If you think back to 20, 30 years ago, you had a line of people with chalk and marking grading boards, right? Like and trying to
Mm-hmm.
grade a piece. And I've always said as a sawmiller that I think that a human can grade a board better than a scanner can. You just can't do it at 200 lugs a minute. It's fast, right? Like so, but I would almost make the argument now with the AI technology that is probably flipped. And I think that our AI technology can probably grade a board better than a person can now. And it can identify species, identify all kinds of detection and gives us more accurate ways to trim boards, trimming out defect. So we're seeing a big increase in what we call high value product. And so what we instead of making a low grade, we're actually making more of a high grade product, because of the AI, upgrade that we did back in November, of 24. And there's other things too. We're using AI for controls of logs inside the sawmill and making decisions based on, how logs fall into chains and how fast they move along through the primary breakdown and whatnot. So there's some really, really big AI stuff going on in the sawmill. And it's fun. It's fun time to be in.
So it's very interesting when you talk about that from a point of view of, we think of logging and sawmills and so on being very much sort of old school. And certainly that's not the case at all.
Absolutely not. And I think we could, I think we could do a way better job of selling our story of, and all the way through our business, right? Like, we plant more trees than we take every year. We sustainably manage our forests. We're SFI certified, all the way through. The sawmills are very safe and highly technical. We're not just a bunch of lumberjacks with a chainsaw over our shoulder anymore. Like that's not the business anymore, which is exciting, right? Because as I said, you want to try to take people out of the process as much as you can with guarding and with distance and technology and whatnot. But unfortunately, we still have to have people intervene, and we have to build safety processes and be really good at what we do.
So when you talk to your colleagues around the province and look at your own operations as well, what kinds of injuries are you seeing these days?
Sure. Finger, hand, and arm seem to be minor cuts, pinches. We have a lot of maintenance personnel working on very heavy metal, pulling chain. Even the operations folks, we still have to touch boards every once in a while. Pinches, minor cuts, and strains and sprains seem to kind of be where our injuries are, in the sawmills nowadays. And, I gotta say, even, I've seen some, in my past, I probably shouldn't talk too much about some of those old stories that I've seen back in the day, but I've seen some pretty gnarly injuries. And, nowadays, not only are they less frequent, but, it seems to be that the severity is also less, right? And that's a lot of things go into that, right? Like doing good investigations, making sure we have good standard operating procedures and documentation, and training is probably the biggest thing. I think about, back when I was, I talked earlier about that sawmill back in Washington when I was 18 years old. If I think back about that, here I am, 18-year-old kid, and don't know any better. And and then when I see my son, went into the sawmill also, I think to myself, that's that was a paradigm shift for me when my son was in the sawmills too. Just because, it opens your eyes, and when you're out on the floor and you're talking to individuals on the floor, that person is somebody's son, somebody's grandmother, somebody's kid. And my kid is working in this industry, and that is somebody's somebody, right? If that makes sense. And, it helps you kind of, as you work in the industry over the, 30 years that I've done it, you do have times where you kind of have that shift. And that was a big one for me when my kids started working in industry, and my older boy is Uh, he was in the Marine Corps, out of high school, and then got a job as a longshoreman out west. So he's loading ships. It's a good job for him, but it's dangerous. And, I get on him all the time and text him about wearing his safety glasses and making sure he's doing the right thing. And again, kids those age, and what I'm getting at is, when we have kids that come into our facilities, we have to have a good training regimen and onboarding program for these kids because they don't know. And I think back about myself, when I was 18, and I didn't know a dang thing and didn't know how to raise my hand and say, hey, this doesn't seem right. And we're doing a good job of that now.
Yeah, you talk about that, Mike. When in my past, I was at WorkSafe NB for a number of years, and part of my responsibility was young workers. And, I talked to them over and over, and I'd keep hearing that, we think we're invincible. We don't have to worry about that. If it does happen, it's going to happen to someone else. It's a big challenge. Right. And as you say, the key is a good onboarding program, good training program, to make them realize that, out there in the industry, it can be very dangerous.
Yeah, but it's definitely dangerous, but with the level of controls that we have in sawmills nowadays, we've taken, a lot of that danger out with our policies and procedures and processes, right?
Yeah. But for kids that have maybe grown up playing video games, to put them in a sawmill environment, or really any industrial environment, it certainly has to be a big shock to the system. So as you say, you try and engineer as much as you can out,
yep.
and then through training and so on, you try to counter all those other items. When you look around your mill, or look around any mills in the province, what are the more common hazards you're still seeing that you have to really focus on? Lockout's still a big issue?
I've always said there's three things that you have to be bulletproof at in a sawmill, and you can throw a fourth in there, and I'll get through it. But the three big ones are lockout, tag out, working at heights, and mobile equipment. You have to be perfect at those, or else you're going to have incidents, and they're not going to be pretty, right? A piece of mobile equipment's not going to stop when it hits you. Falling from heights, I don't have to explain that one. And then lockout, tag out. Like it's one of our major focuses at both of my facilities, lockout, tag out. And then the fourth one that sometimes I'll throw in when I'm talking is fires. Obviously we work a lot around fine dust. So we have a pretty good loss prevention program is what we call it. Our loss prevention program is essentially, de-risking our facilities with fires. But yes, Pearly, one of the big changes that we made when Interfor bought us in 2022, in terms of lockout is we have what's called a pre-work hazard assessment and lockout verification. So if somebody's doing a lockout, on a piece of equipment, they have to have somebody there with them to double check that locks are placed, that, all the buckets have been pulled, and the tryout's been done, and all the risk has been mitigated before we enter a piece of machinery and they sign off on it. And it's been a great program. We instituted that in August of 2023. And it's upped our game and helped us identify areas where we needed improvement in terms of our documentation, going through and making sure that we're documenting, which pieces of machinery need to be locked out in certain lockout zones and whatnot. So
what does a typical health and safety program look like in a sawmill today at a very high level, not in too much detail?
Right on. So for me, one thing that I do when I talk to people is, we always say that safety is a priority. And, from my perspective, safety is a priority, and we need to make it a priority when we're talking about training, when we're talking about making sure we're building the right guards. But more importantly, Pearly, it's our values. And if we make choices on the floor based on our values, and we're all aligned in our values, all those other priority things and upset conditions that we still deal with, people are going to make the right choice every time. If they're making the choice based on their values, they're saying, hey, I'm not going home hurt today. I'm going to look out for my buddy. And, so, you know, in our mills, you know, we have a good, investigation process, when we do have incidents. We have, you know, ways to mitigate, corrective actions. We have, a computer system, Pearly, where we can enter in, action items and do follow up, on items that we find out on the floor through hazard observations or actual incidents. You know, one of the cool things that we do in Interfor, is Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock. All of Canada is on a safety call, and we're all on a Teams call, and we share incidents across Canada. And, the amount that we take away from that conversation with, you know, our other mills, you know, within Canada, has been significant. And that's every Tuesday. We talk about, you know, anybody that's, had any kind of injury, any kind of serious near miss, any fires that we may have had and how we can combat that. And it's a huge success, and everybody really, really likes it. It's about an hour, give or take, depending on how many incidents across Canada. So, you know, Interfor does a really good job of leveraging their breadth. And safety is one of those items that they use, you know.
So what are you seeing as far as attitude to the worker? How have they changed you relative to, say, your mill when you talk to your people? If you were to talk to your people now and you think back to, you know, 5-10 years ago, you know, if you were to talk to your people, what kind of different attitude are you seeing, or are you seeing a different attitude?
Absolutely. So, you know, 20, even 10 years ago, you know, we all want to play on a winning team. We all want to produce. We're in a manufacturing facility, right? We all want to have a good shift. We all want to produce good numbers and be profitable and all those things. Excuse me. But, you know, I always say that we just make wood. We don't need to do anything worth getting hurt over. But the thing is like, what I've noticed is that teams that can work safe will also be the ones that are productive. And there's a direct correlation to that. So you do not have to compromise safety for production. And that's kind of been a big shift, I'd say, in the last 10 years, you know, because before that, people are, you know, doing whatever they can to keep sawmills running, right? Like they're keeping equipment running and trying to unplug conveyors and all that stuff. It's, so we've proven that you don't have to sacrifice safety to be productive. And people are buying into that on the floor, all the way down to the guy that's in the basement shoveling brick dust. Like it's a good thing to see.
So what's a typical work week look like for you, Mike? I know they vary, obviously, but what would you do in the run of a week?
So, I have two facilities. So I kind of go back and forth between the two. You know, we have some capital projects that we're seeking out. And so I work with my two mill managers on some of our forward-thinking capital projects. We have reliability discussions on how we're going to improve reliability at the mills. You know, we work on, you know, our waste in the mill, you know, so we purchase a log and it makes lumber. And some of that byproduct that we have goes to, you know, pulp and paper, but we also have bark that goes to the hospitals for heating. And so, you know, we try to limit the amount of waste that we have at our mills, and so that's a big discussion. And so, you know, we work together with our woodlands team too. Every week we have a leadership call here in New Brunswick when the woodlands guy comes down to Bathurst or Beldoon, and we all sit and we discuss, you know, what the inventories are and what the inventory levels look like in the next month. So, you know, we have a good finance team here in New Brunswick. We talk a lot about forecasting models and costing. Costing is a big thing for us. We want to try to maintain competitiveness in New Brunswick. And so we work hard on, you know, being low cost, and that means, you know, not being frivolous. And so, yeah, that's.
So if you were to go to a sawmill conference or any sort of gathering where you have sawmill health and safety folks from across the country, what are the biggest issues that they see facing your industry in the future?
Boy.
Beside the issue, obviously,
you're in reference to safety or
safety,
just in general
safety.
sawmill?
Health, well, just in general too, but especially in health and safety.
Right.
Obviously, like any organization, you have, the issue of surviving and remaining competitive and dealing with tariff issues in the States and so on. But especially, generally as it relates to, continuing growth, but keeping your workplace safe as well.
Sure. And what I hear around, a lot of, we have operations in 4 regions, in North America. So we have, mills in BC. We have mills in the Pacific Northwest in the States. We have what's called our Eastern Canada division, which includes Atlantic and, Ontario. And then we also have, a large breadth of mills down in the U.S. South. So Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Missouri, Georgia, and South Carolina. And excuse me. And one of the things that we challenge with most, that we talked about it a little bit, is, the changing workforce in where we're at in 2025. And you kind of hit on it, the kids that are playing the video games, the kids that are graduating high school, the kids that are, there is a changing dynamic in the workforce. And that is a significant challenge for us in terms of not just, trying to attract, but trying to keep people in a sawmill and making sure that we're doing our crosses our T's and dotting our I's in our training programs and making sure we have good hosting conditions. But that's a major challenge, in some of the regions in our company is keeping people. And that, you can build a sawmill anywhere. You can, hire a sawmill building company to build a sawmill wherever you want, but you need round wood, you need a place to put your residues, and then you need people. And people, that third one there, I mean, that's in no particular order though, Pearly, but, people it's a tough one, and we've seen it in our skilled trades also. I think that's something that's fairly, the same across, our industry, is that finding good skilled tradespeople is tough, and finding leaders in the skilled trades departments are also tough. So that's.
Are you having those kind of problems here in New Brunswick as well?
What's that?
Getting workers?
At times it kind of ebbs and flows. It ebbs and flows. We've revamped our hiring processes. We're now doing pre-screening for drug testing. We have what's called, hiring events now, where they're not just an interview or an application. We actually have people come in and do like a little skilled, like a little activity in a break room where you can watch somebody interact with other people. So we've kind of upped our game on how we hire. And then, once they get in our gates, it's all about the hosting conditions. And what I mean by that, it's not just, a nice break room to sit and have lunch, but also like, your paycheck is deposited every week and you don't have any problems, all those hosting conditions that can, make your experience at Interfor either good or bad. We're working really hard on those.
So how do you see sawmills changing in the next few years? You mentioned AI is one area that obviously probably, everybody's hearing about it everywhere. So it's obviously going to have an impact. But what else do you think will happen in sawmills in the next few years?
Oh, that's a good question. Cause I honestly, like I said before, like I have to have this AI thing kind of, explained to me. So we have also, one thing that we did at our Beldoon mill, on the backside of our finishing end is we built, it's called a DO2 automated wrapping machine. And before we wrap our dry wood product with tarping, and we've installed essentially a robot that wraps the machinery. We were able to, reduce the amount of staples and fingers. We were able to debottleneck, that area of the mill. And it was also less headcount. So we had less people in that area, meaning we don't have people, having less people is good. Nobody got laid off or anything, but, so moving forward, continuing with the AI, that's going to be big. I could see some really, really good benefits, and further automation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, look, Mike, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I know obviously you're extremely busy between your two locations and so much on the go, and obviously in a very busy kind of operation. So thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us. For our listeners, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to today's podcast. As always, stay safe. We'll talk to you next week.